Hello, everyone, and welcome to NDTV's exclusive interview with ex-Notre Dame basketball coach Digger Phelps. Coach Phelps is going to fill out this big bracket behind me. He's going to talk about how Father Ted impacted his life. He's going to talk about that win over UCLA that snapped the 88-game win streak, and a whole lot more right here on NDTV's YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome inside the NDTV studio for our NDTV exclusive interview with Coach Digger Phelps. Coach, thanks for being here.
It's great to be in Notre Dame Stadium as it's surrounded by everything that goes on, including this operation here at the Duncan.
Well, Coach, you just filled out your bracket for us. You have Duke as your champion, and so let's stick with basketball a bit. I mean, your coaching career here it speaks for itself. I mean, 393 wins, 20-year coaching career here, and obviously I think it's something that even a non-Notre Dame fan would remember you for that iconic win over UCLA, breaking that 88-game win streak. Talk a little bit about that game and what led up to it, because that 88-game win streak started after UCLA lost to Notre Dame as well.
Yes, but one stat you left out. Of my 20 years, the most important stat I'm proud of, even the UCLA win, 56 out of 56 guys played for me. All 56 got their degrees, including Adrian Dantley and Gary Brokaw, who after their junior years went pro, but I made them promise their mothers they'd come back and get their degrees, and they did. But at the same time, it's what these guys have done life after basketball. What's sad, and people don't realize this, 70% of NFL and NBA players, 70%, 5 years after they retire, bankrupt, because they've never had any management skills and how to manage their life and their income and what goes on in life's journey. And that never happened with our players. And they're all out there doing stuff in the real world to have a life after basketball. Like John Paxson, a great player, runs the Chicago Bulls. Brooks Boyer, a point guard. He is vice president of marketing for the White Sox. Scott Paddock is now the president of Chicago Speedway in Chicago. Stan Wilcox, who was on that Final Four team in '78 as a freshman with Tripucka, Jackson, Woolworth, Salinas, and Wilcox. He now, from Florida State athletic director, is now one of the top people at the NCAA in Indianapolis. A guy from Jameer Jackson, Peoria, Illinois, had a tough life growing up. Well, when he graduated and after basketball, he started his journey. And a year ago, he was the CFO of Nelson's Ratings, made $4.4 million a year. So these guys, that's the key that I taught, was life after basketball. And I'll finish with this before we get to UCLA. I always taught leadership. Leadership is 4 characteristics. You give me somebody that's creative, a risk taker, has the right street smarts, and knows how to be a survivor. That is leadership. We had a guy named Mike Mitchell, who was from Cappuccino High School in San Bruno, California. He played as a freshman in '79 when we lost to Magic Johnson in the regional championship as they went on to win the title against Indiana State, Magic and Larry Bird show. Well, Mitch, as a sophomore, tore his knee up. Junior, the same knee. His senior year, I made him captain, and he was captain with John Paxson, who was the other guard. And we played San Francisco here, and this is after the '77 win with Bill Cartwright when they were #1 until they came into the ACC. But Mitch had like 15 or 17 that game, and they were maybe #7 in the country. He's the only guy in 20 years I gave a game ball to, Mike Mitchell. Mitch went on to become CFO, president of, when you look at Nestle's beverage in LA. And he had a 2.5, I said 2.5, not a 4.5, a 2.5 in the School of Business, but he had the leadership. And that's the most important thing these guys learned to get ready for the game of life after basketball. The UCLA situation, well, yes, Austin Carr and those guys beat them. I think they had a 33-game winning streak back then. But at the same time, my first year here, we go 6-20. My second year, we get to the NIT championship. And back in those days, if you didn't get an NCAA bid, because there was no at-larges, so Southern Cal loses to UCLA, you're going to New York. North Carolina loses to NC State, David Thompson and company. Dean Smith, you're going to New York. Then you take a look at Denny Crum in Louisville. Memphis State won it. Good, you're going to New York. We beat those 3 teams, but we lost to Virginia Tech in the championship. But the next year, we were ranked number 2 in the country, and UCLA's number 1. And it came down to that UCLA game on January 19th, 1974. And what was interesting, we're down 11 with about 3:22 to go, and I called timeout. We made some changes on defense, some changes on offense. We outscore them 12-zip. Dwight Clay hits a buzzer, not a buzzer shot, a shot with 22 seconds to go where we win that game by 1, and that ended it. We had to hold them scoreless, which we did. But the fact was this. John Wooden wrote a book that year early, that fall. They Call Me Coach. And in the book, he said, if you call timeout, it's a sign of weakness. If you do everything in practice, you don't need to call timeout. So when we're starting to make the run, Bill Walton looks over to Wooden when we cut it to 3. Like, aren't you going to call timeout to change the defense or change the strategy? Wooden didn't do it. When we cut it to 1, you can see Bill Walton doing this to call timeout. Actually, when we cut it to 3, he's doing this to Wooden, going down the court on his hip. It's in the film. And Wooden says no. When Clay hit the shot with 22 seconds, they called timeout and we held him scoreless. So at the press conference at the game, I said to the media, and this is early 70s, 74, January 19th. In the early 70s, there was a movie, Patton, with George C. Scott playing Patton. In the real game of life, when Eisenhower got Patton to go after Rommel, the greatest tank commander ever, Patton was on that journey. And they're in North Africa, and they got him surrounded. And all of a sudden, Rommel goes in retreat. Patton jumps out of this foxhole. I read this book, you dumb SOB. I said to the media after the game, about 100 people covering this UCLA game, I said, how many of you saw the movie? And they all raised their hand. I said, tell Wooden I read his book, the dumb SOB. But that was, to this day, Bill Walton, we talk about that. Why didn't he call timeout? But that was how it was. But Bill Walton, he was amazing as a great player. Never lost a game in high school. Never lost a game until his senior year, January 19th. That's unbelievable. And he grew up in the San Diego area and obviously was a great player at UCLA after Lou Alcindor. But that was so fascinating to see all that come together. But to this day, when we see each other and we know and wink and, Digger Phelps, you ruined my life. You're the devil. Why didn't you call timeout? So that's the history. But that game was a turning point in us going major and big time,
right,
which led us to like 78, 79, getting to the Final Four in 78 and regional championship in 79 where we lost to Magic Johnson and into the 80s. Because people don't realize, in 80, 81, Tripucka, Jackson, Woolridge, John Paxson, Tim Andre was a center, and a guy named Joe Klein, who transferred after that year to Arkansas. He was from Slater, Missouri. But Billy Varner was on that team, John Paxson. Those guys in December, we played Kentucky and Freedom Hall in Louisville between Christmas and New Year's. They were number 1. Those guys won that game. And in February that year, when Ralph Sampson in Virginia, and we played them in Chicago at the Paul's All-State Arena out there at the Horizon, we knocked them off, and they were number 1. To beat 2 number 1s in the same year, that's never happened. It was interesting. Virginia had a 6-point lead with a minute and a half to go, and we stole it and got it done. So from that standpoint, when I look at all the history of what we've done, I've always said, when I wrote Air Parsegan a letter in 1965 when I'm coaching St. Gabriel's High School in Hazelton, Pennsylvania, what you're doing in football, someday I want to do in basketball. I love the essence of Notre Dame, and someday I want to be a part of it. Well, 6 years later, at the age of 29, I get here and start building that program. What was interesting, Tommy Clements was the quarterback on the football team. And on January 1st, when I beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, Bear Bryant, they became national championship, became number 1 in the country, and they won that game by 1. When Dwight Clay and Tommy Clements, oh yeah, from he was from Catholic High School, Canavan Catholic in Pittsburgh. He had a basketball scholarship to go play for Dean Smith in North Carolina, turned it down to play quarterback for Era. Dwight Clay, who was from Fifth Avenue in Pittsburgh, all right, he hits that shot against UCLA to win that game by 1. So on January 1st, when they became number 1, and January 19th, when we became number 1, that dream letter I wrote in 65 became a reality. So that was a turning point in all of it, but the turning point in my dream in making Notre Dame what it is in basketball back then.
What would you say is your most memorable moment as a coach at Notre Dame?
Well, probably when I look at anything and everything going on, my first year, my first game ever on the road was against my big brother, Bob Knight. He beats me 94-29. We lose that game by 65. But then, of course, when you take a look at who we played and how we played them, to knock off 7 number 1 teams.
No coach, only one other coach has ever done that.
And this is, Gary Williams at Maryland. But they were ACC teams. We played the world.
Yep.
And Gary and I are good friends. But this is what was amazing about it. Father Hesburgh, and I tell people I'm a disciple of Hesburgh. What he did in 57, when President Eisenhower asked Father Hesburgh to get 3 men from the South, 2 more plus yourself from the North, the 6th year, come up with a Civil Rights Act. They go up to the Land of Lakes in Wisconsin, where our priests have this retreat place. They all went fishing that afternoon, like the fishermen in the Bible. That night, they came up with 11 ideas for the Civil Rights Act, took it to President Eisenhower in the White House, gave it to him, and then he gave it to Kennedy, who was going to run it and use it for a second term, but he got assassinated to get reelected for that second term. And then, of course, LBJ in 64, he went around to Congress and said, you all don't vote for this, I'll make sure you ain't going to get reelected, because you ain't getting funded. When 64 had passed. Father Ted lived for that 50th anniversary. And I became a disciple of his. He's the one that got me from coaching basketball to coaching the streets, especially with getting these guys who are dropouts to get them back in school, get a GED, go over here to this vocational school, become an electrician. You can make $60,000 or $70,000 a year. The sidebar to Hesburgh, he was game priest. And those 7 number 1 wins, 3 times. He beat Cartwright in San Francisco when they were number 1 here in 77. Marquette, okay, when they were number 1 in 78. In DePaul in 81, and that's the cover on that book that you have. That's me with Hesburgh walking off the court with my arm around and shaking his hand, and I'm saying to Father Ted, boy, Father, a lot of prayers for this one, huh? He said, yeah, Digger, I was running out of Hail Marys. Vintage Hesburgh.
Well, so that is what I wanted to talk about next, was your relationship with Father Hesburgh and how you changed the culture around the student athlete at Notre Dame.
Well, more importantly, when I was hired by Father Hesburgh, Father Joyce, they said to me, there's 3 things we want you to do. Graduate your players, 56 out of 56. Don't cheat, we never did. And be competitive. I said, what's that? Well, win 18 a year. And the other thing is we have mass data game. And we have a medal, but we never pray to win. We pray to work hard, like St. Joseph, the Carpenters, the game medal. So that became a tradition, even though we'd rotate priests, except he did it on the bench 7 times, and he was 7-0. 7-0 with 3 wins against number 1 teams. Father Joyce would do it for the UCLA games, but he would never sit on the bench. What impressed me about both of those guys is how they ran this place. Hesburgh back then, we talk about Father Soren, and if you haven't seen the play Soren, which has been going around the country, wow, was he an impact player. The closest priest, nothing against any of the other priests who have been president since, to me is Father Hesburgh and who he was and how he was. And if you see that movie about Hesburgh, you get to understand who he was and how he was. The thing about Father Hesburgh, more importantly, back then there was maybe 12 trustees when he took over. A guy named Art Decio, who ran Skyline Corporation over in Elkhart. He told me this once. Ed Steppen was the chairman of the board, Steppen Center. He was a lawyer in Chicago. The board would meet and come up with 3 ideas. Ed would meet with Father Ted and say, well, Father, we come up with these 3 ideas, A, B, and C. And Ted would say, yeah, Ned, I understand. Or, yeah, Ed, I know what you're saying, but I think we're going to do D, E, and F. He ran the place just like Soren did. When Father Moreau wanted Soren back in France, and he created the first post office on this campus. And he was the first postmaster of the post office. And when Father Moreau said to him, you got to get back over to France, you know, you're out of control. I can't, I'm the postmaster. So that's how Father Soren stayed here. Well, Hesburgh, for all those years, he ran the place the same way. And what you see today in this campus is this dream becoming reality from Father Hesburgh and Father Joyce. And we used to spend a lot of time together. I'd be in his office, or we took him over to Parisi's because he'd have his famous Alfredo sauce. So one night I said to him at Parisi's, give me your starting 5. What? Yeah, I want to know who I got to play against if I got to go up against you in a game. He says, you're still coaching, huh? I said, yes, Father. One was Pope Paul VI. I think he was known as Monsignor Mondani, then Cardinal Mondani. I may have the name wrong. But it became Pope Paul VI. But back when he was Monsignor Cardinal, they used to go to this restaurant called Alfredo's, which is about 4 blocks from the Vatican, and had the famous Alfredo sauce that Alfredo would make, which has gone international today. And that's how they became great friends. So when all of a sudden he became Pope Paul VI, he invites Father Ted over, and they're in his office at the Vatican. And the Pope's here, and the Pope's secretary and other cardinals behind him, and Ted's sitting here. And he puts the ring in front of him. I want to make you a cardinal. No, I'm a priest. And for 1 hour, they're arguing. The ring's on the table. Father Ted puts it in his pocket. And he says, no, I'm a priest, and he leaves. And the Pope's secretary says to him, and he's outside with him, you stupid Americano, he tried to make you a cardinal. You say, no, what's the problem? He says, I'm a priest. He comes back a year later to see his buddy, Pope Paul VI. And, okay, where's the ring? It's back in my office in Notre Dame. He died with that ring. It's in his archives today. It really is. That was number 1. Number 2 was Eisenhower because of the Civil Rights Act. But they were great friends. When Father Corby went to the battlefield in Gettysburg way back for the Civil War and had Mass before the Federal troops went up against the Confederate troops. Every year since that, a priest would always go back and say Mass. Well, Father Ted went back to Gettysburg one year, and he let Ike know he's coming to town. So they met in this little hotel room and talked for like 2 hours. Father Ted sat on the bed, and there's one little chair in the room. But that's a relationship because Gettysburg is where Eisenhower had his farm after he retired, and Camp David was up in the hills where he started all that. But they were great friends way back when, and their relationship was amazing. Third one was Father Joyce, because he ran the place financially, but if Ted was out of town, Ned would just get things done, and he never had to worry about it. And I'm trying to say there's got to be a woman. And I'm thinking it's going to be Joan Kroc because of the Kroc money that's here on this campus, millions. No, it was Helen, his administrative assistant. Helen was the sweet little old lady, thick glasses, old Underwood typewriter, knuckles all frozen up, smoking a cigarette. She ran the show for Ted, who to talk to, who to call, where are you going next? So one day, Ted's nervous. He doesn't have a speaker for commencement, and he doesn't have a priest from Rome to say Mass for the seniors, which was how it was done in those days. She says, why don't you ask your friend Eisenhower? Oh, he's too busy. He's the president. Have you asked Eisenhower? No, I haven't asked. Well, I think you should ask Eisenhower. Helen, why don't you ask Eisenhower? A week later, she comes into his office. Ike's coming. Have you got one of your priest friends yet from Rome? You can see the picture in the book, okay, of Pope Paul VI being a priest. And you will see that Ike's here and Ted's in the middle. It's in the back, I think. Let me look. But the thing was, that to me was another turning point in Hesburgh's life as the priest who knew how to get things done from that standpoint. But anyhow, oh, here it is. Pope Paul VI, Eisenhower, and Father Ted. This is class. But that's vintage Hesburgh. Yeah. Helen's the one that says, Ike's coming. Have you got one of your priest friends yet from Rome showing up? You know, it turned out to be Pope Paul VI.
So that put Helen into
Helen number 4. So who's the number 5? He says, Leahy. I said, you fired Frank Leahy. He says, yeah, but this was earlier. Why? What happened? Father Frank Kavanaugh. Okay, Father John Kavanaugh was president. His brother Frank was the one that hired Leahy from Boston College when they met in Albany, just like Father Joyce met me in Detroit and stole me from Fordham. So anyhow, what happened was, as he looked to Leahy, and I said, why Leahy? He said, well, Father John Kavanaugh said to me one day, because he was teaching, but he's hanging around the administration building, Father Ted, I'm going to make you dean of the students because all the deans are out of control. And by the way, take over football because Leahy's got those guys practicing when they should be in class. So he gets the Big Ten manual. The Big Ten manual, they travel with 35 on the travel team in the Big Ten. Leahy's traveling with 48. Father Ted's a game priest, and they're going out to Seattle to play the University of Washington, 2-day train ride. Leahy never went to Mass. He went to Mass, but never talked to Father Ted. He'd go to Mass, leave the Mass, never talk to Father Ted on the all the way out. We're losing this to Washington and Seattle. Next thing you know, we come back and win in the second half. Leahy at the press conference is ripping on the officials. National headlines. Crybaby Notre Dame comes back and upsets or wins against Washington and Seattle. National headlines. Embarrassment. Mm-hmm. They get back. Father Ted calls up Leahy. Father, I'm sorry for what happened. You getting a lot of mail, Frank? Yeah. Send it over to my office. I said, how much mail was it? He said, 2 garbage buckets full. Really? I said, what'd you do with it? He said, I burned it. So we're going for a walk around the lake. Leahy and Father Ted, St. Mary's Lake. And Leahy thinks he's getting fired. And he's apologizing and apologizing. And Father Ted finally says to Frank, Frank, I had a meeting with Father Kavanaugh. Now he starts sweating because here comes the bomb. From now on, we go out to the West Coast, you charter a plane. I said, that was it? He said, yeah, charter flights, no more train rides. So that was Leahy in the starting 5. The Joan Kroc story, which is another interesting story. He's speaking at a luncheon. She comes up after the luncheon and says, how do I get involved with what you said, Father, to do these things for the have-nots? And he goes like ABC. She says, okay, fine. So she leaves, and he says to somebody as he's coming home, who is that lady, Joan Kroc? Who's Joan Kroc? Because he's never been to McDonald's in his life. And I go, McDonald's people. Really? Yeah, really, McDonald's. I need a drink. McDonald's people. So he invites her out for a football game, Southern Cal. They're riding around the campus in a golf cart. In this building, we do South Africa. In this building, we do Europe. In this building, we do Asia. She says, you don't have one building for all these? No. She sends a check for $10 million when she gets back to have a building. They bring her back, have a ground, shovel, ceremony. After a year, Father Ted goes into development and says, what's the interest on $10 million in 1 year? 10%, good. Send a check for $1 million back to Joan Kroc because we don't have one brick in the ground yet. Fact. It's his birthday, May 25th. He's up in Land O'Lakes fishing. She calls him. It's May 25th is his birthday. She calls him. Father, did you get my birthday card? Happy birthday. No, Joan, I'll get it when I get back. He comes back, opens it up. There's a check for $25 million. And then when she passed a few years back, another $50 million. But that's how he was with people. A great story about Duarte, who became president of El Salvador years ago. Duarte and his brother came up from South America by train, come up here. They're in Father Hesburgh's dorm, Farley Hall, for 1 year, because he could speak Spanish. And he graduates. Well, every year, our alumni association has these Universal Notre Dame nights, as they used to call them, or alumni meetings around the world. So he's down in Panama City, Panama. Bishop McGrath, who was a Notre Dame grad, invited him down, Notre Dame grad. Bishop McGrath invited Father Ted down to be the speaker. Nappy shows up from Central America because all those countries are invited. He says, Nappy, what are you doing? He says, Father, I'm a civil engineer back home in El Salvador. Nappy, it's time for you to take that country out of that communist dictatorship and bring in democracy. He runs a revolution, gets 2 fingers chopped off. They win the revolution, bring in democracy, and he's the first president of El Salvador. He told that story in the early 80s, Duarte, when Hesburgh gave him an honorary doctorate. He told the whole story. But that's how he was with people. And with me, it was like coaching the streets. I'd get players from inner cities. But what about the other guys? Well, what happens is, with our educational system, these kids struggle grades kindergarten through 4. Now, middle school, they still have issues. Now they get to high school, they flunk algebra, flunk biology. What do? Get to the street life, which is nothing but the gang life. So for me, it's like getting these guys. There's a guy named Rob Staley who runs this crossing program here. He's got a few of them around the Midwest. And they get these dropouts, no matter if they're 14 to 24, including single-parent women today. And they get them back in, get them faith, give them life skills, and get them a GED. Then go next door to like the Career Academy learn a vocational school like an electrician. And then I got the people here in town, the electricians union, getting these guys jobs. If they can become into the union, they can make 60, 70,000 a year and live to be 80 versus being dead at 20. So that was taking a game of basketball to the street game, and still working it and trying to do it for him, even though he has passed.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question was your work with the Lincoln Grammar School here in South Bend and how Father Hesburgh inspired you to do that.
This was so funny one night. I see him at a function, and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I started the mentoring program in town. I'm at ESPN," and he gave me that look. That's all, Digger? Duarte speech. So I end up taking a look at our schools in South Bend. The Lincoln Grammar School was the worst of any of them. So we decided, with permission of the superintendent, to fix it up, the community. We raised some $200,000. We had one day we did, it was on the Today Show. We had it on a Saturday morning. We had 800 volunteers, and we got like 80% of that school done that day for the kids. But the most important thing was to add after-school programs, which we had our English department there, and they came down to junior class and taught creative reading. I had the Postal Service do an after-school stamp program to have these kids learn more history about what this country was. There's a bunch of chefs that got together, and we started an after-school cooking club, which 450 kids signed up for this program, for the whole after-school program, out of, say, 700 kids, because they could walk home after school. Neighborhood schools, neighborhood walks, you don't need busing. So it became a great success, and then we did Marquette and Twickenham. We did 3 schools. And I donated money, got people to match me to get it going. We raised some $200,000, but Lincoln was the first one we got done. But at the same time, it was me outreaching to other cities around the country, in Memphis as an example. And this is why I don't understand why we don't do this national. There's a Soulsville charter school right where soul music started back in the 50s. And when the jazz got into it, one of these guys started this Soulsville charter school, and they started with 6th graders out of the class every year. I went there and spoke to them one day, about 400 kids. And I said to those kids, what instrument you playing? One girl, 9th grader, cello. Cello? What are you playing? This other girl, 8th grader, violin. This other guy, cello. I said, let me tell you kids something. You get a music scholarship to DePaul University in Chicago, but take a degree in business. Someday you'll play that violin for the Chicago Symphony, but with your degree in business, you will run the Chicago Symphony. And they don't clap, they do this, because that's the signal for soul music. And their signature, you're like, we have the Shamrock or Leprechaun, that's on all their uniforms or jackets. I got invited to speak at their first commencement, 51 kids. Those 51 kids, they had to move it from a church, from the school gym to a church that's at 1,500, because people wanted to see this. And what was interesting was, every time I go to Memphis, I want to go see where Martin Luther King was killed. And I see the hotel and all that, and I just can't believe it. So that night when I spoke to the kids, and I said to them, I said, today I went to where Dr. King was assassinated, and we know all the great speeches he's given. I have a dream, or we shall overcome. He's up in heaven tonight looking down at you 51 kids because you overcame. And they went, and everybody went crazy in the church, like amen and all that. But they got $3.8 million in scholarships to go on to college. But music was the hook to get them going.
Right.
Just like basketball is the hook to get some of these guys when they play around here in the summertime, to get them to crossings or the after-school training programs that are available for them. So yeah, that was the whole history of me going around the country and spreading the faith with Hesburgh, no matter if it was New Orleans and what I did down there after Katrina, built 2 homes for 2 families that needed them. Father Doyle, who was the president of St. Augustine's High School, where Donald Royal played and came here to school. So it was going back after to where all these guys that we got, what's going on with these other kids? Are they dead? Jail? Gangs? No, let's go. We got to get you started. You're going to win the game of life, especially in vocational education.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And so finally, to transition, I mean, campus has been something of your home since you came here to start coaching in 71. What are some of your favorite spots on campus, some of the spots on campus that mean the most to you?
Well, today being Tuesday, this is a very special day to me. As you see in the book, there's a chapter about the medals. There's a chapter about the hidden crucifix in the woods.
Yep.
The spirituality of this place really grew on me, I would say, as going back 48 years when I got here. More importantly, I think Father Hesburgh believed that knowing how the French priest came over here and knowing how the Blessed Mother, Our Lady of the Lake, or Notre Dame du Lac, but at the same time, the other woman, Mary Magdalene. It was interesting because she, Mary Magdalene, after Jesus died, he was surrounded by two women. His mother from Bethlehem, when he was born. Mary Magdalene from Magdala. It's a fishing village. It's like Digger from South Bend. It's Mary from Magdala. That's how she got the name Mary Magdalene. Fishing village on the north side of the big lake over there in Israel. And so when he was going there to go to Capernaum, he went through Magdala in the synagogue, and she heard him preach. So he's going over to Capernaum to meet some of his other buddies, the apostles, so to speak. Maybe Peter and a few of the other guys. But anyhow, the thing was, when Jesus died, she was the first one to see him at the resurrection. So he's surrounded by Mary, his mother, at his birth, and Mary Magdalene at his resurrection. And even though the crucifix on Good Friday, when we genuflect, it's Mary, wife of Cleopas, according to John, who wrote this. It's Mary the mother and Mary Magdalene, are the three women at the crucifixion. So his whole life, he's surrounded by both sides of women, and the men are in there. And that's why Peter always got in arguments with him, because Mary Magdalene was getting all the information before he was. But she ended up leaving Israel to Egypt to France, and she died in France. So there's this subconscious spiritual connection between Mary Magdalene and the priest from Le Mans to what this place is. So in all the times we spent together, and you can see in there's a picture of him up at the hidden crucifix when he's putting his bench in there and blessing it for me. Linda Costa's my fiance. I would go up there and pray all the time. It's on the way to St. Mary's before you go around the cemetery. It's in the woods. It's Mary on the right, Mary Magdalene on the left, and Jesus on the crucifix. And Father Ted believed that was a holy spiritual place on this campus. Nothing against the grotto, nothing against Basilica, but it's amazing how many people don't know about the hidden crucifix in the woods. That to me is the most spiritual part of this campus. And I'm always there, and what's amazing about Tuesdays, today's the day where this morning I was at the grotto, lighting special candles for Father Hesburgh of people that we would pray for or that were sick. And it came down to the game medals. When I talked about that Bob Knight game, losing by 65, there was a priest named Father Jim Schultz, who he was a game priest for the Indiana game. And on the bus ride back, he says, "Digger, can I be the game priest in 2 years?" I said, "That's up to Father Tui." And Father, "Really?" "Yeah." And he was game priest 2 years after. And we go back and beat Indiana. In 1982, he gets sick and dies. He was from Valparaiso, Chestnut area. His brother comes in my office a week after the funeral with a box of leftover medals from the masses he said. And I get mail, and I take one out, send it to somebody that's sick, and I ran out of medals. So then I decided, what am I going to do? So I got St. Jude, who used to be our game medal for UCLA, until we started beating them 4 straight out there in Florida Pavilion for hopeless causes. And I got the Lady on the Dome with the Sacred Heart in the back. But I'd have Father Ted bless them. And I'd give people these medals that were cancer or sick or whatever issue was, and tell Father Ted about it to pray for him. And so he, would do anything and everything as far as trying to pray for those who needed prayer. And that was his outreach. And what's incredible about it, the thing to me is that those medals, which I still have a lot left because I had him bless them, the hidden crucifix in the woods is one of the places you have to get to. And what happened that one day when I'm getting in the car, shut up, get in the car. Where are we going? Just shut up, we're going. And all of a sudden we stop on the road, and I look down the path, and there's Father Hesburgh getting down the cart path with Melanie, his administrative assistant, and Father Austin Collins. and he blesses one bench, because my prayer is the power of prayer is the will to win. You bless the medals, you kiss the medals, and you say the power of prayer is the will to win. That's how I beat my 2 cancers. And from that standpoint, I just started crying when I saw him there doing that. But he knew that that was the sacred turf, and he knew my feelings and his feelings. And from that standpoint, it became, to me, the spirituality of this place is what keeps me here. Not the weather, obviously. I love the campus, I love the students, love doing this. But it's the spirituality of what this place is. And every Tuesday, I'm at the grotto early morning, getting those candles ready and lighting them for Father Ted, including his, and those people we pray for. And then go up to the hidden crucifix. I got medals in my pocket that I take out. It's still too cold to get out of the car yet, but I usually go out and sit there and nail and pray. And over to, when I look at the campus and the Blessed Mother on the dome and the crucifix, it's Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Jesus, Sacred Heart, and everything else, and St. Jude for what they do and how they do it. But what also was interesting about Father Ted and how he was and who he was, he always was very humble. He would say Mass every day in the crypt at the Basilica. And he never flaunted it, but he was born to be a priest and was going to die as a priest. And his mother Teresa was as a nun. And she's a saint, to me, with Hesburgh. And I'll tell you something interesting. I was on the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee for 22 years. And I'm the one that got the new Rockney stamp for his 100th birthday. And I had President Reagan come out here as the Gipper. We had it staged in a basketball arena. The football team was up front, 12,000 people. Reagan threw a pass to Tim Brown. He caught it. And this is when he won the Heisman Trophy. And so every time I see Tim Brown, I say, Tim, you know what you can do with that Heisman Trophy? Because the only pass you ever caught them anything was a pass you caught from the Ripper, from the Gipper. And we all laughed. The Gipper pass from President Reagan to Tim Brown. Pass from the Gipper to Tim Brown. But, so when Hesburgh died, on March 4th, we had that memorial for him after the funeral at the ACC. And then we went over here to Corby Hall before they tore it down. And I see his brother Jim and Mary there, and Father Collins and Linda and Melanie and a few other people. And I told his brother, I'm going to get your brother a stamp. He said, what? He said, you watch. So I went back to my friends in the post office, and that's when I got to know Megan Brennan, the Postmaster General, the first female Postmaster General, who was put in February 1st. Father Ted dies February 26th. And I told her about Hesburgh, the Civil Rights Act, and how he got 150 degrees from around the world from universities and colleges as an educator, not as a priest. And that's how we got him in. And so I knew one night at priest, he said, what's your greatest accomplishment, Father Ted, in 35 years as president? Co-ed. Good. The alarm went off when I got the stamp. Megan Brennan is a woman. She's going to speak because she's Postmaster General. He recruited Condi Rice to come here. She grew up in Alabama under rough times. Her dad ends up teaching at Denver. She ended up going to the University of Denver. Ted knew her father. So he recruited her to come get her master's here in 74, 75, Condi Rice. So I got a hold of her at Stanford and had her come in as a speaker for the Hesburgh stamp ceremony. So I got 2 women doing the stamp ceremony and 3 priests, Father Jenkins, Father Collins, and Father O'Hara, the provincial, to give the final blessing. But I'm looking up, Ted, you happy? 2 women got your stamp going. Yes, Digger. But no, that was the other sidebar of Hesburgh's life. And to me, he should be up for sainthood. I don't know what Pope Francis is waiting for or why. But what was interesting, a guy named Jim Cochran, who was Vice President of Marketing for the Postal Service, he ends up doing a Kennedy stamp. It was his 100th birthday. In like April, this is going back a couple years ago when Hesburgh turned 100. And I called him, I said, how'd the Kennedy stamp go up at Harvard at his presidential life? He said, it was okay, Digger, but I know South Bend's going to be big with Hesburgh. I said, everything good? He said, yeah. He said, I got to tell you 2 stories. What? This guy came up to me at the Kennedy stamp. He said, can I bring my mother, she's 90 years old, to the Hesburgh stamp ceremony? Father Hesburgh used to babysit my brother and me while my dad went to school at Notre Dame. What? Yes. Gets a name and address, invites her. This black guy goes up to him, Jim Cochran. The Hesburgh stamp. Can I get invited to that? Yeah. He said, I got to tell you, what Father Hesburgh did for me as a black man, is the reason I am who I am today. Without him, I wouldn't have gotten this done. Gets his address. And I said to Cochran, I said, we don't know how many people Hesburgh has touched in his life to give them that hope in winning in the game of life. And that's why, to me, he should be up for sainthood, because we just don't know. It's more than Notre Dame than what he was and who he was as a priest.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Digger. I mean,
my pleasure. You got to get to class, to be honest.
I do have class.
I could go another 2 hours, but, you know, student.
For more exclusive Notre Dame television interviews, check out our YouTube channel, NDtv Notre Dame Television. Coach Phelps, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching our exclusive interview with Digger Phelps. For more interview content from NDtv, be sure to check out our YouTube channel and tune in to Shamrock Sports every Friday in the Delkin Student Center.